Welcome on into the Wolverine.com podcast, live edition. Clayton Sayfie here with special guest Isaiah Hull of Wolverines*Wire in the Locked On Wolverines podcast. We're going to talk about all things Michigan football with the coaching staff changes. We'll get to your questions as well, so please drop those in the live chat here on YouTube. Also, if you're watching on YouTube, hit the thumbs up button, subscribe to our channel, and we have a special offer over at thewolverine.com. Promo code UM1 gets you 2 months of premium access for just $1. I know Isaiah is we follow his work very closely. He follows ours as well over on thewolverine.com. But man, thanks for doing it. Thanks for being here.
Kept me afloat during vacation, right? Because I tried to unplug as much as I could in the worst possible time to unplug. So I'd go to the Wolverine.com every morning while I waited for Sarah to get ready, and it kept me abreast of the things that were happening, since I told everyone, do not contact me. I just want to live my life. And it was due to the fine work that you all do over there that I still know what's going on.
Well, appreciate that for sure. Hope you had a great vacation.
It was terrible, actually.
Much deserved. Well, okay. Well, hopefully,
no,
hopefully that's not true. Appreciate you being here. Let's talk a little bit of coaching staff stuff and then get into some people's questions as well. And again, feel free to drop those in the live chat here on YouTube. We have some from our premium message board, The Fort, over at thewolverine.com that we'll get to, but it doesn't have to just be on coaching. You can ask about last year's 15-0 season, covering the team, anything behind the scenes that we can get to as well that people want to know. So completely open-ended. If it's a dumb question, then we will not answer it. So ask away. But let's start with Don Wink Martindale being hired by Michigan as a defensive coordinator. He's been an NFL coordinator for about 10 years in the league, 4 years with the Ravens, the last 2 with the Giants before kind of a parting there. And then we'll talk about Steve Clinkscale as well, leaving, about a day later after Wink was hired, which is a tough loss. But Isaiah, what were your thoughts on Wink Martindale coming in? A guy who hasn't been in college since 2003 at Western Kentucky is now Michigan's DC.
Well, I know some of the more scheme fanatics who follow me weren't as enthused as I was, but I think it's a home run, to be honest. And it to me, it's kind of the tale. The people who aren't like as excited about it, they're looking at it through the same lens that they look at a lot of the coaching hires, right? And they said a lot of the same things about Mike Macdonald and Jesse Minter, and that they weren't excited for, they come up with reasons why. To me, I was corrected that he was not the official architect of the defense, but in the Ravens and what they were running and how they were running it, he was the one who was running it, right? And it was under his tutelage that Mike Macdonald and Jesse Minter learned the version of the defense that they brought to Ann Arbor to run. So it's funny because I remember talking to Ballas about it a month ago, right? Like, who are they going to get? And both of us settled in on Wink Martindale, but more as like a joke. Like, that would be hilarious and amazing, but we know that's not going to happen. He's an NFL guy who's been around forever. There's no way that he lowers himself. You know how they think of themselves in NFL circles. No way he lowers himself to coming back to college after having not been in college for 20 years. And it just, I'll kind of like Jim Harbaugh coming to Michigan in the first place. The stars somewhat aligned, and it ended up working out. And I think that there's a lot of people, obviously, that are going to say a lot of kind of ridiculous things like this is Don Brown 2.0. Listen, Wink Martindale's a heck of a lot better than that. He's not a one-trick pony. As you look at his even his record the last 2 years with the Giants, yes, he blitzes a lot at times. It's all kind of tailor-made to who he's facing. And there are times where he goes blitz heavy, and it has usually done pretty well. And there's times where he backs off. And I think that there's no better person to bring in than the guy who the other two learned from. And will it be as exciting? I don't know. We'll see, right? Because those were two in Macdonald and Minter who were trying to climb up the ladder, improve themselves, and earn, jobs at the next level, which both of them obviously have at this point. But nonetheless, I think Wink is going to want to prove that he still can be that top tier NFL defensive coordinator. And it's just funny to me still seeing some of the Michigan backlash when I saw before he got hired by Michigan, a lot of Dallas Cowboys fans who thought that he was coming to Dallas and were over the moon for the idea of him coming and coordinating the Cowboys' storied defense, and it didn't end up going that way. So Michigan fans should be grateful and thankful, because I think that this is a heck of a hire.
So Anthony and I last Thursday went through, and this is before he was hired. We went through some of the blitz rate stuff. I mean, it was like, they were first in the NFL a few years in a row. He was, never finished lower than 8th in percentage of blitzes on passing downs. But you're right. If you look at it game by game, and there have been some articles that have kind of broken this down, he does tailor it to the opponent, and they'll, kind of do very similar things in that way to what Jesse Minter did at Michigan the last 2 seasons. Mike McDonald, we had a smaller sample size of what he did at Michigan, but it feels, very similar. I remember Mike McDonald, this stuck with me, especially coming off the Don Brown era and covering that. But I remember him saying, it was either the first spring or in fall camp when he got in, he said, we're going to have we're going to have a menu of what we can do defensively. It's going to be a lot, but it's going to be different every week, so it may not be massive every single week. But we're going to be able to do a lot within a season. And we saw that. Do you have any concerns about him as a recruiter? Because the way I look at it is he's probably not going to be, if there's a, when the dead period ends, I don't think he's going to be on the road every single day traveling the country. I think he'll probably make some spot recruiting trips, visit top targets, that sort of thing. And I think when you get guys on campus, that's where he's going to really flourish as a recruiter, because he's going to be the face of that defense. He's a guy that once you get these recruits or transfers or even your current players that you're always trying to recruit in a room with him, and he's talking defense, and he's talking about coaching Ray Lewis and, a bunch of different guys throughout his years in the NFL, that's going to resonate with them. Also, he's a player's coach. It seems like his players like him. That's huge, obviously, in college these days. And I think that could help recruiting as well. So it may not be traditional. I think as long as you surround him with guys who are grinders on the recruiting trail, like I think that they can, but they still need to do and fill out the defensive staff, then I think they should be fine there. But do you kind of, are you in that same boat, I guess, with your perspective on him as a recruiter?
I'm not terribly concerned with him as a recruiter, because how much did we really talk about Mike McDonald or Jesse Minter going out there and being avid recruiters? I've seen the work that you guys have put out on your board. I read a lot of EJ's articles. I have my ear to the ground on certain recruitments. Not once did I ever hear like, man, Minter really sold this one, right? Like it has not been the case, and it's kind of like what Ohio State fans talk about Jim Knowles. Jim Knowles is not a guy who was out there on the road and doing a heck of a lot of stuff. It's more of the rest of the defensive staff at Ohio State that does it. It's just like in the last 2 years, it's been rest of the Michigan defensive staff that's been out there recruiting. So as long as the other defensive coaches or the area coaches are out there doing it, that to me is bigger. I'm sure that Sherrone, being an avid recruiter himself, has probably asked him like, hey, we'd like you to do a little bit here, do go out on the road and do some things, maybe some of our bigger targets. But I think even just by virtue, the fact that Michigan has Sherrone Moore now as the head coach, is a guy who is an avid recruiter, was one of the ace recruiters. I mean, Jim Harbaugh, yeah, he goes out on the road and everything, but he's never been known as a guy that was going to go out there. Like most of the times when I talked to recruits, they talked about their position coach. When it was Josh Gaddis or Sherrone Moore as the offensive coordinator, they talked about their relationships with them more than Jim Harbaugh. Now, at least you have a head coach that's an avid recruiter. So it matters to me less if your NFL caliber, not even caliber, NFL defensive coordinator who can throw out some of those names, right? That's something that you just can't replicate. And he can, they can come and they can meet with him and they can get to know him when they come to Ann Arbor. And to me, that's enough, right? You don't necessarily need him to be out there, doing any kind of antics and really just kind of making things look like he's a young guy, right? He's all football. He's all business. When he comes to town, he'll be football, he'll be business. And that will be enough to sell a lot of guys outside of the, NIL sphere.
True. You're still going to have to get that going. That's, regardless of who's the coach, that included if Jim Harbaugh was here, have to improve there. Same with Sherrone Moore. But no, I agree with you on, on Wink's involvement there. Steve Clinkscale is a guy who was a great recruiter, an overall great dude. I enjoyed covering him. And, when we got to talk to him in media settings or, just kind of see him around. I mean, the dude had his own logo on his hat. Like he just had a presence to him that I appreciated, old school type of guy. And, it is too bad for Michigan that he's moving on to the Los Angeles Chargers. Looked like there were indications that he was going to stay at Michigan. It seemed like from what our Chris Ballas reported, the buyout there was one of the hangups. And that's why we weren't as, speaking about it in as certain of terms when there were indications that he was going to come back. I don't know if Los Angeles decided to pay the buyout or not, or all of it or not. But it seemed like after the Wink Martindale hiring and knowing that Steve Clinkscale wanted to be the defensive coordinator, that this just may not have worked with them together. But what are your thoughts on that loss and kind of what went down there?
Oh, it is certainly a loss. And, you mentioned his recruiting. I mean, there were certainly – he was an avid recruiter, but, when I look at his wins and losses, it's been more of a development that he is the bigger loss than being able to go out there and get, the top flight guys, right? Like, you keep in mind that he, swung for the fences with Aaron Scott and Bryce West and missed out on both of them. There was never really a point where it was outside of Will Johnson, right? Where who came aboard before Clink even, he was on the board before Clink even actually ended up at Michigan, if memory serves. There really hasn't been anyone that he's one that you sit there and look at and say, now that is a heck of a recruiting win. He's gotten great guys, so don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to disparage him in that light, but the development piece certainly has been phenomenal, and that's where and talent identification, right? DJ Waller, you look at Josiah Edmond, just absolutely shooting up the recruiting rankings and now outranking in one of the services. I don't remember which one, or at least a couple of them, outranking Bryce West, who was seen for a long time as the top guy in the country at corner. And they get a 3-star from Purdue that certainly didn't look like he was much of anything, only to be now ranked in the high hundreds. So the development and the talent identification piece, the state of Ohio, all of that is obviously very important. So they're going to have to replace that, the relation to the kids. We obviously always like to, off camera, you and I always like to say, we like to coach them hard, but love them harder. Like that's coach them up and love them up. Though any variation of that Clink said. I mean, he's certainly a strong personality, and it sucks to lose a guy like that. Someone that you really felt that the kids absolutely loved, they played for, and we saw what they were able to do under him. Like, again, the development piece is invaluable. But at the same time, that's showbiz, baby. So they're going to move on, and certainly there's a couple guys that are rumored at different positions that could have a similar kind of impact. We'll just have to see, but it's a shame, especially considering it seemed like he was going to be the one continuity hire that they were going to have on the defensive side. And from all indications, he was staying, and something changed at the 11th hour. And it's not surprising that Jim Harbaugh wants to bring as many people as he can. I mean, if he's not bringing Sherrone Moore, he didn't end up getting his son. You wonder if Jay Harbaugh ended up going to LA, if that would have made him lay off trying to bring in Clink at one point. But there was just so much competition for these guys, considering it's not just Jim Harbaugh trying to get his guys with Jesse Minter. It's also Mike McDonald trying to get guys, right? So it's a very small pool of people who have run this system. So now it's just going to be up to Wink to replace Clink.
For sure. And you bring up a great point there at the end. It was really tough, I think tougher than expected for Sherrone Moore to make the defensive coordinator hire and maybe some of these other defensive hires. We'll see what happens. But it just so happened that when Jim Harbaugh leaves and he takes Jesse Minter with him, Mike McDonald gets a head coaching job, which leaves John Harbaugh in a lurch as well. Anthony and I discussed this on the show last week too. I want to get your thoughts. now there, it may have limited Michigan's candidate pool in the short term here, but in the future, now there are guys in Seattle, Los Angeles, Baltimore, Michigan, maybe even Charlotte, you could say, with the, Charlotte 49ers that are running a similar defense. And that could actually help them out, because if Wink is not long for this job, if he is going to be here for 2 seasons, let's say, and then goes back to the NFL as a defensive coordinator, there are going to be guys training in multiple different spots here. And I think a lot of guys would jump at the opportunity to be Michigan's defensive coordinator, especially seeing as how it led to Mike Macdonald becoming an NFL head coach a couple years later, Jesse Minter now being an NFL DC, and potentially Wink, going on to back to the NFL as a DC. But don't you feel like maybe in the long term, they may be actually, it might be a little bit easier, and you may even promote from within at some point. But I know it's looking a couple years down the road potentially, but I think that eventually this could end up being a positive for them.
Yeah, it's I would like what Jim Harbaugh said with the Michigan West thing, and I know everyone's kind of ragging on that at the moment, because he's pilfering and pillaging the current staff. But I mean, it wasn't going to, he wasn't just going to take someone that was a leftover with the Chargers and say, you know what, you'd be good for Michigan, right? He's going to have his people, and then have a couple other hires that kind of work for him there that maybe don't come along. I mean, it's certainly feeling like defensively he's bringing pretty much the whole band back together. We'll see if he brings Chris Partridge over there. But nonetheless, I mean, he's going to have to be able to bring in his people and be able to hand them back to Sherrone Moore to get that promotion for that Michigan West thing to be an accurate thing. So it was going to take time for that to happen. And it's going to be more of a 2, 3, 4 years down the road when Sherrone's like, hey, I need a linebackers coach, or I need a defensive coordinator, or I need an offensive coordinator. And he can go to Jim Harbaugh or Mike Macdonald in that moment, and then be able to say, and they'll be able to say, I have an up and comer who I think is perfect for that. Right. They aren't in that position to be able to do that at the moment. And I think the hard part is, and I mentioned Chris Partridge earlier, that would have been the likely DC in waiting. He would have been an internal hire probably. And I think that's why he was brought on as linebackers coach, why they were willing to give a firm handshake to George Hilo, because I think that they looked at it and said, we can bring in a guy who can be the next defensive coordinator and not leave anytime soon. It just happened he was a casualty of this whole Connor Stallions thing. So I think that that's where things kind of, the plan went awry for Jim Harbaugh to some degree. And now Sherrone Moore obviously has to kind of write his own path to just a little bit here. But nonetheless, I think that those dividends will come down the road. You just got to give it some time. And I think that Michigan's, at least currently, it's getting set up to a place where, okay, that defense still probably should be a really, really good one, if not the best one in the Big Ten. I know that down in Columbus and certainly other places around the country, Oregon, they'll have their say. But I think that with a mixture of the personnel and at least Wink Martindale coming in, some of the rumored hires that he's going to be having come and replace some of those guys who have left, I think that they'll still be in a really, really good spot.
No doubt. And the key there is keeping these guys, after, whether that's after spring ball, or doesn't seem like, many guys will leave in the next 11 days until that transfer portal window closes. But as long as they can keep the defense especially intact, which is the side of the ball you're worried about with all the staff changes there, that's going to be huge. And the last thing for me, just on Clink leaving, and really to the same extent, Mike Elston going as well. Like, those guys wanted to be the defensive coordinator, from all indications. And I trust Sherrone Moore's judgment there that he wanted to look elsewhere for it. I think he understood the risk that came with doing that they could leave, that also players, may get a little bit frustrated. And that tells me even more so that he probably made the right call. I think both of those guys are great assistant coaches. But just based on, what Sherrone Moore did there and judging his actions there, I think, to me, that was probably the right call. And, if the staff dynamic wasn't going to be great, if those guys stayed and didn't get what they wanted, then, I'm not saying it's addition by subtraction, because those are great, great coaches. But I still think that you can build a great staff that just looks different. And it might be unexpected for Michigan fans that thought they were going to keep more of these guys in the fold, but it just doesn't seem like that's going to be, well, it's definitely not reality right now on the defensive side, at least. And, I feel like that's just kind of where we're at. But
and to that point, they changed the entire defense when they brought in Mike McDonald, and that was a different scenario, right? Because this was coming off of Don Brown in his worst year. He wasn't really bad. He wasn't great against Ohio State, but he wasn't bad overall until that 2020 year. They broomed the entire defense. No one had really any reasons to believe that it was going to be great, and then it ended up being great. You just kind of have to let things play out and see how they end up working out. And I think that at least by keeping the continuity schematically, that's gonna do a lot. And being able to, Wink sits down and says, I know everything. He's seen a lot of football, right? He's seen a lot more football than Minter or
he's seen a lot of balls kicked off.
Yeah. So we're going to be using Jim Harbaugh idioms for quite some time, I feel, but it's that's going to pay a lot of dividends. And like you said, we got to get through spring. I think the fact that they included some of those players in the interview process for Wink, I think that helps a lot, right? Because it becomes they have more blood in the game, right? More skin in the game, I should say, than if you were just a cog that they, it's like, okay, go out and do your thing, dummy, right? Like that, you don't have anything to do with the coaches. That's been like the culture change from the beginning, right? Was players have skin in the game.
Yeah.
And like that's going to help. Like, oh, you're going to go for, you're going to go to Texas, or you're going to go to Oregon, or any of these schools that are paying big money. You're going to go to one of those schools and then become just another guy, whereas here you have ownership, like you said. So that's a big difference.
No doubt. We're talking about continuity. You brought up that word. Who has continuity is Lewis Jewelers in the Ann Arbor community. They've been serving Ann Arbor and Detroit, Isaiah, since 1921. Their reputation and continued success stems from our belief that a successful jewelry store is built on integrity, quality customer service, and quality products. They're a proud partner of Michigan Athletics and the Wolverine to ensure that every client that walks through their doors or peruses their virtual store is taken care of. They have a non-commissioned, trusted advisor team that's always ready to provide professional experience, advice, and expertise. No pressure, no commission. They're located in the bustling city limits of Ann Arbor, Michigan. And Lewis Jewelers is proudly serving the Ann Arbor community. They provide an exquisite selection of fine jewelry as well as excellent customer service to its residents and visitors. You can visit them at their new location, 300 South Maple Road, Ann Arbor. It's an awesome building that popped up over there, or online at lewisjewelers.com. So thank you to Lewis Jewelers. Great sponsor. It's also where Ann Arbor gets engaged, if people didn't know. So make sure to check out Lewis Jewelers for all of your jewelry needs. They've been serving the Ann Arbor and Detroit communities since 1921. Let's talk about Greg Scruggs, who looks like Michigan's next defensive line coach from Wisconsin, spent a year there. He was an assistant defensive line coach for the New York Jets in 2022. He spent a few seasons with Luke Fickell at Cincinnati as well, was the defensive line coach from 2020 to 2021. They built a really good defense there, took them to the college football playoff in 2021, where they were smashed by Alabama, like many others that came before them in that college football playoff semifinal. It takes a great team.
Yeah, it takes an amazing team, really the best ever, to go into the college football playoff semifinal and beat an Alabama football team, no matter what year it is.
No question about that. So, and we saw it firsthand on January 1. So this is a guy who also played 5 seasons in the NFL. You got the pedigree there. He won 2 Super Bowls, which is crazy, in his 5 years.
Like Mike Dana.
What's that?
He's like Mike Dana.
That's true. Yeah, he absolutely is. And shout out to Mike Dana for winning his 2nd straight Super Bowl last night with the Chiefs.
They couldn't have done it without him.
That's right. He drew the holding on Trent Williams early on. He had 3 tackles. So, no, that was cool to see for sure. He beats Jake Moody and the rest of the Niner gang there, Ronnie Bell and Ambry Thomas. But, yeah, I mean, this is a guy who is certainly an up-and-comer, a guy that, Luke Fickell has had some great defenses throughout his career, knows defense, a guy that's been a trusted agent, of Luke Fickell. And seems like the next step would be, hey, get a raise, come to Michigan where you can recruit a little bit better. I was looking at some comments from EJ Holland, our recruiting reporter over on the Wolverine.com, and some of the big pulls that Scruggs got to Wisconsin were guys that Michigan didn't necessarily prioritize. But I think now, if you're at Michigan, you have a little bit more of an opportunity to pull some of those guys. And by all accounts, he still had some impressive recruiting wins. So that's him on the trail, but also development, is a key piece as well. But your thoughts on this expected hire that Michigan could make a little bit of a splash here within the Big Ten as they try to build out that defensive staff?
I only started kind of looking into him today since I had been on vacation for the last week, but
yep.
It's I mean, you look at the fact that, obviously he knows Sherrone going back to when, Sherrone was a coach and he was a player at Louisville, and then they were both coaches together. And so he has a little bit of that overlap, and it's always good to see, someone being pulled up kind of the same way that Jim Harbaugh pulled Grant Newsome up. Obviously much different, right? Because Scruggs has already long been a college position coach as well as an assistant in the NFL. But having a young guy trying to make a name for himself, like you mentioned, the Cincinnati defense, I mean, that's all development, right? There's no world in which, even the year before they went to the college football playoff, they gave Georgia all they could handle in that Peach Bowl, I believe it was, or whatever it was. Sugar Bowl, I can't remember. It was one of the BCS.
Yeah.
But they gave Georgia all they could handle in that game, and certainly defensively, they got to the journeyman JT Daniels over and over again, and that speaks to his ability. Just kind of looking at this last year at Wisconsin, right now. I shouldn't say right now. This was last year, but you look and you see a lot of pressure more from the outside linebackers. But how much did Wisconsin have interior guys that can actually get to the quarterback? And certainly, if you look at Michigan any other year, the stats would look kind of similar. So I'm curious to see what a young guy with his pedigree, someone that, again, he's got the Super Bowl rings. He's got he's young. He can go into some rooms and have that fire and have that relation, right? That's the type of thing that helps change the culture in Ann Arbor, along with the team ownership of it all. So I think just having that youth, especially because if you don't have the youth at the defensive coordinator position, you should probably have it at some of the others. And I think that can certainly help. I mean, he looks like a dude still. Just seeing, I can't see the pictures
looks
that
like
you're
he could
putting
play
on the screen, but I saw some pictures earlier, and it was like, yeah, that's they let him strap it on for a couple plays a game. It's only fair. But I like the idea of it, and I trust pretty much anyone Luke Fickell brings in. He's done a phenomenal job after his 1-year stint at Ohio State in 2011. Really just been excellent everywhere he's gone. He's made really good hires. So I think that's a really good one, especially it speaks to, in a way, how good he is, right? For the sake of, he was with Luke Fickell, went to the NFL, and then when Luke Fickell came calling again, he came back to college, even though he was on that trajectory. So for him to leave Luke Fickell certainly doesn't speak well of loyalty. So we can go ahead and call him disloyal right off the bat. Kidding, of course. But nonetheless, it speaks to where the Michigan program is, and as well as the fact that he has followed Luke Fickell, going from that director of player personnel all the way in 2018 in Cincinnati to being a position coach there, to getting that chance in the NFL, to coming back to college, and now seemingly Michigan. I think it's a great trajectory, and that's the type of guy that you want to bring in.
And you're right. He looks like he could potentially play. Maybe he needs to work with Jay Tress, and get fully up to speed. But when he's holding that bag, and guys are trying to hit him, he's going to have a little bit of resistance to him. And when he's holding that bag, the guys that are going to be hitting him are pretty damn good players. If you're him, you would have to imagine that he's pretty excited about the defensive line that it looks like he's going to work with, right? Especially the guys on the interior. I mean, that's a big selling point. And I think that's really the strength of this team if you go in next year.
Absolutely. I mean, that's obvious. There's obviously reasons why you see fans from other fan bases getting excited about Michigan having the transfer portal window open at the moment. And
right.
It's really centered around two guys. And that's again, I didn't really see a lot of Wisconsin last year. I think the only game I saw from Wisconsin was their loss to Ohio State. I mean, they did a really good job up front against the Ohio State offensive line. Now that I think about it, in that game, but it's having what he had at Wisconsin, which has always been a developmental program for a long time, right? It's not one where you're going to get a lot of 4 and 5 star recruits, specifically on defense. They're looking to identify and develop guys. They've done a great job of that under the stewardship of Barry Alvarez for a very long time. But nonetheless, it has to be an absolutely tantalizing situation, because I can't tell you anywhere else that probably has the best 1-2 punch at the interior tackle than Michigan right now. So, for him to come in, I mean, he's certainly going to work and ingratiate himself with his talent and do everything he can to want to keep them here, at least from a, hey, we're going to tailor make this to you guys, because this is the best situation you could come into, honestly, as a defensive line coach. Working primarily with the defensive tackles. That's not even to mention you've got guys like Josiah Stewart and Derek Moore, and lots of guys that you can work with on the outside, guys we haven't even heard much about yet that have that potential, like in Cameron Brandt, who probably would have gotten more time if they just weren't so loaded at the edge rusher position this last year. It's a great situation to come into. It would make all the sense of the world why he'd want to leave Wisconsin, and I think that the talent that he'll be working with, I mean, there's no reason why this thing can't keep rolling on the defensive side with similar scheme, a really smart guy like Wink Martindale. And then if you're a young and up and comer like Scruggs is, I mean, this is like the perfect situation to kind of just continue your career trajectory.
Could not agree more. That is, we'll see. It was reported about Steve Kasula that he was going to be joining on, and then about a week later he was announced. So these things can take some time in the final stages, but it looks like he has indicated Wisconsin that that's going to happen. His players, you saw some reaction on social media as well from them. So this is, barring something crazy, seems like it will happen for Michigan. I know I just hedged there a little bit, but you never know these days with coaching. I mean, you may think you have a head coach one day and next thing you know, he leaves to become a coordinator of another team in the same conference. So there's a lot of craziness with this never-ending coaching cycle, but it seems
you don't even know sometimes until after spring. We saw Brian Jean-Marie and what's his name?
Linguist.
We've seen those guys leave after spring in consecutive years. So you just kind of never know what you're going to get.
Right. Guy's staying, then he leaves. Yeah, for sure. Let's move into the Q&A portion of the show. And our first comment really is from EJ Holland, who says, my guy Isaiah, the only guy in the market I like. I assume that means also his coworkers. It's separate.
No, just me. He just means me.
Yeah,
because we go all the way back to 24/7. Because we were 24/7 teammates.
TOS. So. We call him TOS.
I love you, EJ.
Thanks, EJ, for chiming in. Yep, EJ is the best in the business on the recruiting beat. I'm going to start with some questions. So make sure to get them in the YouTube comments there if you're watching. Appreciate you doing that. We will get to as many as we can. Let's start, though, with a couple from the Fort, our message board over at thewolverine.com. And Sasquatch616 wonders, and this is a long one, but it's hard to know what the football roster will look like after the spring transfer portal opens up. Based on your opinion today of what you expect will happen with transfers in and out of the program, what is your win-loss ceiling and floor for next fall? If they keep almost all of the roster intact and manage to find a reasonable game manager quarterback in the portal, can they make the playoffs? How deep of a playoff run are they capable of? I'll let you start on that one.
I'm not even going to necessarily say they need a quarterback because certainly I'm personally tantalized by the idea of Alex Orji. If they decide to utilize him like Jalen Milroe, and he's obviously got that experience in the for a month of bowl prep. So I think that if you can keep everyone and then just identify, wherever you feel like you have some holes, I think that wide receiver is kind of the bigger one. If you can go and get one or two receivers that can help be more of those outside guys, try to find a speedster like a Roman Wilson that's a taller guy that can stretch the field, try to find a more of a possession receiver like Cornelius Johnson. I think Cornelius was really underrated. A lot of those times you saw like Michigan on 3rd and long and Cornelius is making a catch right at the sticks. And, it might not be in when the game's 0-0, but certainly he was doing it when the game was on the line. Finding some guys like that, I think if they can do that, and it's obviously going to depend on what names become available in the spring, if they're able to keep the bulk of the roster at that point, I mean, I don't see any reason why they can't make the playoff. But yes, the schedule is hard, but you have most of your hard games at home. Ohio State's on the road, obviously, but I mean, Texas loses some defensive pieces. They lose a couple offensive pieces like Xavier Worthy, what's his name, Addison. I can't remember his name. The wide receiver that transferred in from Georgia that they had. That's really good.
Yeah.
So like they've still got a quarterback, and they've got some pieces, and obviously their defensive front has been good, but they lose some of those guys as well. They can come to Ann Arbor. That's a hard trip to make in season. Michigan's going to be able to give them their best shot, I think. And the other games you look at are Oregon and Ohio State. If you can get one or two of those, I think that you could even you could lose two and win one and get into these playoffs depending on how you lose. Because keeping in mind that it's a 12-team situation now, I certainly could see them getting there, winning one. Maybe the team coalesces and maybe they're able to win one more. I mean, certainly I don't think this is going to be a team that repeats. I mean, you just lose not just talent, but you lose a lot of leadership. And you just hope that a lot of those guys trained that next group to take up that mantle similarly. But I won't know until I think we see it. But I certainly think that this could be a team that goes to the playoff and certainly has that potential to win one, maybe two games.
Yeah, I don't love putting ceilings on teams because if you win one playoff game, you could win two, right? And on and on from there. I remember going into 2021, everyone was like, "Oh, 8 wins at most." Not everyone. I don't know if I don't think you were one of those people, but people were saying that. It's like, well, if you can beat a couple of those, if you can win a couple of those toss-up type of games, like at Wisconsin that year, that sort of thing, well, then you can win at Penn State. Like it's just tough to cap it. So I know that's kind of a cop-out because everyone loves to go on record and say, here's the floor, here's the ceiling. But I don't know that there is a ceiling. I don't know that they need a quarterback either. I do think it would be great to bring one in, at least for competition. But I agree with you on Alex Orji. Really, if you're not going to have the high-level receivers, then he's definitely your best option, in my opinion, if you go with the guys on the roster, because him running an effective offense isn't going to be dependent solely on the pass game because he is such a dynamic athlete. And the Jalen Milroe comparison is not just one you brought up. It's not just one that Jim Harbaugh brought up. It's not just, the role he was playing with the scout team leading up to the Rose Bowl, but he told me after the Rose Bowl as well, before the national championship game, that he was watching Milroe all season long and kind of envisioning what that could look like. So I think that is exciting. Milroe turned into a pretty decent passer. We'll see where Orji is with that in his development, but I think Michigan can make the playoff next year either way. I also think that they could struggle and they could lose, 4 or 5 games if things broke a certain way as well. So again, it's not a hot take, but that's just kind of where I sit here on February 12th. Blue Thunder.
Before you continue, I predicted them to go 10-2 because I did while on vacation, I did a series of listicles that could go. So I predicted them to go 10-2. Granted, you don't want to know who one of those two is, but that's what I predicted them to do this year, and I think that's fully possible. But yeah, 7-5 is also on the table. We just have no idea.
You think they could get in the playoff with 3 losses with this schedule?
Yeah, if they find themselves in a similar situation to, like, say, the 2016 team that lost 3 games by, I don't know, one was postseason, lost 3 games by a total of 5 points. I would find the committee led by our collective boy, Ward Manuel. I think they would find it really difficult to keep them out in that point.
It's a good point for sure. And even losing 3 games with how tough of this schedule of a schedule that Michigan has, it still means you had some pretty quality wins in there as well. Blue Thunder 24 wonders, is Clayton Sayfie on the fence about joining the Chargers beat? Would be a huge loss for Michigan if we lose another one. Appreciate that. No man knows the future, Isaiah, but it would be kind of funny if Harbaugh just started plucking reporters out of Ann Arbor too.
Well, you'd be one of them. It's you told me that you were staying, and I'm pretty sure you told a lot of the other coaches and players that you were staying. So bye, Clayton. This has been an absolute pleasure working with you, and I'll talk to you when I also join the Chargers beat.
Yeah, I'm sure most of the players are waiting around, as to what I will be doing next season. But no, I plan to cover the Michigan Wolverines in 2024. That's all I got to say.
Yeah, planning, definitely planning.
That's right. We got a super chat here. Go Blue 982. Am I wrong to think Orji is going to be more Denard-like if he is quarterback? Honestly, I don't care about another national championship. I just want to keep whipping Ohio State. That is fair. Like, look, the expectations and the goals at Michigan always start with beating Ohio State, winning the Big Ten. Then, of course, you want to compete for and win the national championship. But, yeah, I mean, to beat Ohio State this year, I think would be a pretty good win given what they have, what that team's going to look like, and what Michigan lost from this past season. But I think he could be Denard-like, obviously more power, maybe not as much speed in the open field. I mean, you remember some of those Denard runs, like the 87-yarder against Notre Dame and all that. But I think you could build an offense similarly around him. And I think that, I don't know exactly who it would be. I don't know. You don't have Ravens guys on the offensive side, but you kind of think of Lamar Jackson and what they did maybe pre-2023. I think that's something that you could look at too, the way they built that thing.
Yeah, he's got a cannon too. Don't forget, we saw him make that long pass to Samaj Morgan in the spring game, and obviously, if you sit and watch any pregame warmups, he got it. I mean, it's not Joe Milton, but in a good way and a bad way, right? Like he's not going to necessarily throw a 90-yard bomb, but he's also going to throw with a little bit of touch. So I really like that capability that he has. Yeah, and I agree with you. I don't think he's necessarily going to get into the get in the open field and be off to the races in a similar way. We've seen him get caught, but Milroe isn't that either. It's keeping in mind unlike Denard, who he's not a diminutive guy, but he was more of a track guy. And I know Orji did that in high school and all, but he's built now like a linebacker. It's a different style of running, and it's less getting into the open field and then he's off to the races. And good luck taking him down because he is bigger than you at the quarterback position.
For sure. Great question. Thanks for that one. Go Blue 982. We got Antoine Johnson. Says Corey Parker from Toledo is a great area recruiter. I'm hoping Michigan gets some along with Greg from Wisconsin. Both of them guys are great developers and recruiters. Appreciate the comment. Yeah, I mean, Corey Parker from Toledo is one that looks to be on the board for Michigan's either cornerbacks coach job or defensive backs in general. He was at River Rouge for a while as the head coach. Did you ever cross paths with him at all, Isaiah?
I'm sure I did. I know the name, so I'm sure I have. I never developed a relationship with him. If me saying that is any indication, River Rouge only really ever had one player that I covered, and he ended up going to Clemson, and Rook Orhoro, or I don't know, or Horhoro or something. I can't remember to say how his name went. It was just lots of HORs in there, but. No, so I didn't really connect with him much, but I know I've crossed paths with him at some point. I just don't really remember that interaction. But yeah, I think that he would be a guy that would be really great for recruiting Detroit, and that's always needed, especially when there's a coaching change in East Lansing, right? You don't want there to be a situation where suddenly all the top players from Detroit are going there like they were in the D'Antonio days. You want to be able to keep that pipeline going. So I think that having more Detroit guys is always a great scenario to have.
Doesn't have a ton of experience in the college game, but like you said, I mean, Ron Bellamy's on staff. He came from that path. And he would be able to recruit Detroit. Did a great job developing Quinyon Mitchell, who's one of the top corners in this year's draft, multiple All-America honors this past season, first team All-MAC as well. He led the country with 25 pass breakups. So he's a guy that's kind of making his name right now, and he could be one of those up-and-coming guys, again, maybe more up-and-coming in terms of experience at the college level than Scruggs, but somebody kind of along the same lines there. And then you have a veteran defensive coordinator. So he's on the board, and we will kind of monitor, as I'm sure you will as well, some of those candidates as time goes on here and Michigan continues to search. Let's see. Let me get to another one. Sasquatch616 says, question for Isaiah. You and the boys from the Wolverine, Ballas, Sayfie, and Broom are doing an impromptu 2-on-2 pickup basketball game, and you get to pick your teammate. Who do you choose and why? He says, if it sways your opinion, all the game will be played on one of those Nerf hoops you hang on the back of your door so Clayton will be able to dunk. That's fair. That's important to know.
Well, I mean, I would pick Clayton for not just because he's on the show, but we would have a height advantage.
We
Clayton's
could post
about,
them up for sure.
yeah. I mean, I'm 6'1", you're what, 6'2"? So I think we could, Ballas is, he doesn't like to let people know this, but he's actually like 4'11". So, we could really just dominate. I love all the guys, but yeah, I would pick Clayton.
Now we know whether or not he's watching, because if he is, we're both about to get a text because he's not 4'11" for the record, but
I mean, it's not 4'11", 5'1". He doesn't like he wears those platform shoes so he can go around. Yeah, we'll definitely know if he's watching, because any second now, I expect my phone to go off.
All right, let's move on to Hoops Coach N3D. He says, can you break down the importance of Sean McGee's role as the football GM and all he'll be responsible for? From what I've read, this is an exciting hire. I mean, yeah, seems like he's going to be responsible for a lot, kind of overseeing both recruiting, NIL, I'm sure scouting goes into that as well, operations, to be the general manager of the program. And I think that that's something that is become kind of a hot thing in college football, with all the different responsibilities these coaches have now, these head coaches have, where you need somebody to kind of handle a lot of the administrative stuff. I talked to somebody who was on Michigan's coaching staff for a couple seasons when Sean McGee was also at Michigan under Jim Harbaugh. And that person said that he did everything behind the scenes. And then I also talked to somebody who worked with him in Chicago, and they said he did with the Chicago Bears, where he was last there for a couple seasons. Said that he was awesome. He did a great job, and he was about to go to Oklahoma to kind of do a similar thing there, play a similar role. But Sherrone Moore was like, wait, had you signed yet? And he's like, no, I haven't. And he's like, hold on, let me talk to you about a role we have in mind here. Sherrone Moore able to get him at the last minute, I think, is huge for the program. And it sounds like he's going to have, wear a lot of different hats, but he's also going to build a staff around him in the recruiting side of things and all the different areas that could do a lot of the work too. And he's just going to get them organized. And I think that you need to do that in today's college football, especially with a guy, fair or not, like Sherrone Moore hasn't been head coach yet. And, there's a lot that needs to be done behind the scenes.
Well, the last that Michigan fans heard about a Navy guy, it was about their meticulousness and ability to go above and beyond. So I really like Sean McGee. I've obviously known him for his entire tenure during his first stint at Michigan. And yeah, I mean, he's got that level of Navy meticulousness. He's got a very large family and he's able to run football. And he was always had a really good handle on what the team was, what the team needed, and all of those types of things during his first tenure. And I remember just how sharp he was, right? He could always tell me exactly how a game was going to go before a game, right? And he would say, like, if we win, it's because we were able to do this well, this well, this well, this well, this well, and this well. And if we didn't, it's because, and there were just moments where we weren't in practice able to get this going, or this or that. So he knows the game. He knows what it's like to be in Ann Arbor. Extremely meticulous. That's everything that you really kind of want, right? And he was initially brought on to be a recruiting guy and ended up being more of a general manager for Jim Harbaugh. So I was disappointed to see him to go in the first place. So for him to come back, especially when now he's got the NFL experience, was being sought after by an SEC school, we can say now.
I don't even think of them as SEC. Yeah.
So it's right now it's Big Ten over the SEC. No, I think it's a great hire, and it's a good thing for continuity, because remember, he was around in 2021 when it all started, right? So he knows what the bad years look like. He knows what the good years look like in Ann Arbor, and what it takes to have more of the good years. So I think it's great.
No doubt. And when you think of it too, like Jim Harbaugh always kind of had a right-hand man. It was Colonel Jim Minnick in the beginning. Sean McGee kind of played that role in the middle of his tenure. Biff Poggi comes back, plays that role for sure before he left for Charlotte to become their head coach. And then really Ben Herbert, last year, and obviously the years before that too, but he promotes him to associate head coach. I think that has as much to do with Ben Herbert leaving Michigan for Los Angeles as it does, the impact that he's going to have on the Chargers from a strength and conditioning standpoint. Like Jim Harbaugh wants his guys around him. Jim Harbaugh wants a guy who's going to help build that culture there. And I think Sean McGee, he's not going to be the strength coach, right? He's not going to be as hands-on with the players and everything in that way. But, I think that Sherrone Moore needs that guy on his staff to help him out in that way. We do have time for a few more. We have a super chat here to make sure you get your comment in. Please send in a super chat just so we can see it and get to you right away. We'll prioritize that. But Go Blue 982 with another one says, off topic, does Michigan see Florida State as a conference foe in 2025? Man, I hate all this conference expansion. I don't really keep that much up with it, to be honest with you. But what are your thoughts on that?
I'm going to say no, but I would love it. I've long idealized, it's just, to me, that's part of growing up college football. You turn on the TV at noon and it's overcast, but you can see the humidity in the air in Tallahassee. I would absolutely love it if they got to play Florida State on a regular basis like that. But I don't know. I think what eventually is going to happen is there's just going to be one big mega conference, right? And then what they can do is they can take the best teams in a region, right? And then they can break those down into smaller groups that play each other all the time. And then you can even break those regions in by two. And then, maybe you have a couple that you play you play everyone in one and then play a couple in another. I think that's probably where we're going eventually.
Did you just reinvent what we just had for the last 40 years?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, it's pretty much.
I agree with you. It's like how now you're getting the bundle of Fox, ESPN, and Turner are doing like a streaming service together. They just reinvented cable. But yeah, eventually everyone's going to join like two conferences. Then they're going to have to split up, and around we go. But yeah, I agree. Appreciate the question there. We got a couple from GR Wolverine 21. Does CMU, this is a good one for Isaiah, does CMU and the NCAA know who the person was at the CMU Michigan State game? I think it's been over 100 days now since the NCAA joined that investigation with CMU, and there has been no answer on it. That tells you how great of an organization the NCAA is.
I think they know, but they don't know.
Prove it.
All.
Yeah.
Yeah, they can't. They haven't been able to prove anything. So they've been spinning their heels in frustration because they, we don't know. We have no idea who that man in the hat when the sunglasses was.
Definitely. He GR Wolverine 21 also wonders, how much did the time off before the Bulls help Blake Corum and Donovan Edwards in the playoffs? I thought the same thing. Where, especially for Blake, throughout the year, he looked a little bit healthier, a little bit more back to form from 2022. I mean, 2022 for Blake Corum was about as good of a season you could have as a running back. I mean, he was ridiculous. I don't think he ever really looked quite like that in 2023, but he did more so as the year went on. And then I think, he was great against Ohio State. He was great against Penn State late in the year in November. But then that time off, I think, really helped him because against Alabama, that was as fresh as he had looked, and just everything was on point. And I mean, made some massive plays, including the final touchdown.
I mean, I think the whole team. It wasn't just those two. It's just a big difference. I know this is before your time covering the team, but having the ESPN reporter who asked Jim Harbaugh when one of the guys going to get to see bikinis, right? Because back then Jim Harbaugh would not let them even partake in. For bowl prep, it would not even let them partake in like the typical bowl week activities because he was like, no, we're not doing that. We're practicing instead. And, I think that finally kind of getting through his head, like, what, maybe it's a good idea for us to just kind of lay off. Like, we didn't have many press conferences in Ann Arbor, the post-practice press conference and in the lead up to the Rose Bowl. Whereas like, I remember all those other bowl games, like it was basically the same exact week that you had, every single week until they flew out, right? You'd still have like 3 press conferences a week. So I think that because that he finally sat there and looked at it and said, you know what, week off, let's just keep these bodies fresh. It was something that was similar that Nick Saban said on the Welcome to the Rose Bowl teleconference that I'm sure you were on as we drove back from Indianapolis. And so I think that honestly that does something, right? And I think that, obviously it was most visible in the 2 running backs because they finally looked more like they did the year before mid-season. So it's excellent.
In the O-line, I think looked fresh as well. And they needed that time in that month to kind of gel again on the right side. And even Drake Nugent missed a bunch of time during that month, but he got himself healthy after really, he said he probably shouldn't have played in the Big Ten championship game, but he gets healthy. That line gels, and the offensive line played their 2 best games, I thought, of the season, arguably. I guess you could throw Ohio State in there the way they ran the ball late in that game, but it was a huge month off. And I think Jim Harbaugh really did make the adjustments that you mentioned. Those were really beneficial. And the last one, I think this is a good one too, from GR Wolverine 21, looking back on the 2023 season. At what point this year did Michigan look like the best team in the country? He says, for me, it was once Harbaugh came back in game 4. I'd say game 5, coming out of the Nebraska game, it was kind of like, I know that was kind of the time of year when the Georgia and Alabama wasn't quite up, to what they ended up being. You kind of looked around the country and you were like, I think Michigan is the best team. Then, there were a couple times like the Maryland game and other spots where maybe you didn't believe it. It's, to a certain extent that they were the best team in the country. But, man, I mean, they were the best team in the country pretty much the whole year when you look back.
It's funny because they don't get the same type of credence that like Georgia did in either of the last 2 years, but they did kind of what Georgia did each of the last 2 years. And they did it with, like, you can, a lot of rival people will say it's self-imposed adversity, but yeah, I mean, it's still adversity. It doesn't matter if it's self-imposed or not. Right. And, they, from that stretch from Nebraska through Purdue, I mean, really, they were just clowning everybody. It's funny because Purdue was like, oh man, Michigan looks off. And with like a minute to go, they're up 41-6, right? Like, it wasn't like they didn't look good, and they still just absolutely annihilated them. Like, so it was, I'm gonna agree with you with Nebraska. I mean, Nebraska was just pretty like, wow. And then you go to Minnesota. I mean, even PJ Flex, like, that's the best team I've ever seen. That was, to me, I think when PJ Flex said that, and I kind of looked around.
Those 2 games, that 2-game road stretch was when I started to believe a little bit.
Oh, so you don't believe? You believe now?
I don't believe. I did pick them preseason. Did you pick them to win it all preseason?
I think I did. Okay. I'm pretty sure I did. I think. Wait, no. I might have done. I think I picked them to lose the bowl game. I picked them to go to the playoff and picked them to lose, but it wasn't because I didn't believe. It was the same type of thing as.
You don't believe?
Yeah, I don't believe. I think it was the same. I think it was the same mentality I had. Where when it started to feel like Michigan could beat Ohio State, but I was still picking them to lose to Ohio State because I was like, listen, I've been through this. I'll pick them when they do it. After they do it. So I had that same mentality.
For sure. Well, Isaiah, thank you so much for joining us for a full 58 minutes. I hope it didn't take too much of your time. Isaiah does fantastic work over at WolverinesWire.com, part of the USA Today network. He's also the host of Locked On Wolverines podcast. Fantastic listen as well. Michigan alum, and you can follow him on Twitter at Isaiah Hull. So find him there. But, man, appreciate you doing it. And, hope you get back in the full swing of things after vacation. But thanks for doing it, man.
This is pretty much the extent of work today. So just taking it easy. And as Anthony and I pass the torch one to the other of traveling to and from Orlando.
True. Yep. Anthony on vacation this week. So we'll be back at it on Thursday. Chris Ballas and I here on the Wolverine.com podcast. But make sure to join us on the Wolverine.com. Subscribe to the YouTube channel here. Like the video. And we will see everyone next time.